Hi everybody, I'm Dickson. I want to thank you for joining me for another edition of our master class. We've been studying detail mapping and interpretation of structure. The first few weeks we covered bars, humps, saddles, and the last time we got together we talked about dams and causeways. We talked about two of our man-made structures that are really important when fishing reservoirs. And today I want to finish up this discussion of detail mapping and talk about underwater road beds. Actually, underwater road beds and underwater railroad grades. Essentially, they're the same. They're identical. One just carried trains and one carried cars. But this, from a fishing standpoint, what's left in the reservoir, they're identical. So our detail mapping and interpretation of these structures and our subsequent fishing of these structures is going to be the same. It's going to be identical. So today I'll just talk about underwater road beds, but you know I'm also talking about underwater railroad grades. They're the same. So with that being said, I'd like to start by mentioning something that Buck used to say all the time. Every time he'd do a clinic, guys would come up and ask him about a particular structure. Will this produce? Will this produce? Will his structure produce? And all of this. And Buck's favorite way of starting that conversation was always the same. It's important that you get this one. He would always say, I got to ask you one question. Does it lead all the way? Now, we've talked about that for about 6 or 8 weeks. Talk about our structure types and so forth. But that's the most important thing. Does it lead all the way? Now, seems like a simple thing. And there's been some misunderstanding about it, so let's clear it up. He said it's got to lead from the shallows to the deep. Now, many times people think, well, if there's 80 feet of water in my lake, I have to find a structure that leads from the bank to 80 feet. Well, no, you don't. When Buck talks about deep water homing a fish, he says that the deep water that I'm describing is the deepest water in the lake or the deepest water in an area of a lake or, like in Florida, the deepest water available. And he defines deep water as anything deeper than 10 feet. Some of the lakes in Florida, I was fishing a lake the other day, the deepest water in the lake would be about 17 feet. So, we'd love to have 50 feet of water down here. We'd love to have 80 feet. We don't have it. In the case of the lake we were fishing a few days ago, it was the deepest water in the area. It was the deepest water available. In fact, it was the deepest water in the lake. It was all of the above. But sometimes that's not very deep, especially in Florida. But in most lakes and reservoirs, you know we have deep water, but sometimes guys are just assuming that, well, if it doesn't lead all the way to the deepest water in the lake, it's not going to be any good. Well, that's not true. Deepest water in a lake, deepest water in the area of a lake, or the deepest water available, as long as it's deeper than 10 feet, the fish will take up residence in that deep water. And then we're looking for a structure that's immediately accessible to that deep water. So Buck's first comment always was, does it lead all the way? If the answer is yes, then we can move on. Now, I pointed out the last time we talked, a dam and a causeway, we don't have to ask anybody if it leads all the way. We know it does. It leads to the channel. They both lead to the channel. Mid-lake causeway leads to the channel. It crosses the channel somewhere. And the dam, self-explanatory, leads all the way. And the dam and the causeway they're out of water. So we know it leads to the bank. And it also leads to the channel. And depending on where it crosses the channel is the deepest water in that area of the lake. So that statement by Buck, I bring it up for this reason. Today we're going to talk about underwater road beds. So first question Buck would say, does it lead all the way? Well, between you and me, road beds were one of Buck's favorite all-time structures, if not the favorite. He said as long as it crosses the lake, we already know a couple things. It leads all the way. Leads from this shoreline to the channel, and from the channel to that shoreline. Leads all the way. And if that roadbed crosses the lake, and at some point crosses the main river channel, There was a bridge there before the reservoir was flooded. It got blown up. They dynamited that out of there. So now all you got is that and that in this roadbed leading up to 2 shorelines. Some of the best structures you'll ever fish. The most bass I ever caught on the cast from one anchoring position was a roadbed, Lake Arlington, Texas. The most muskies, consecutive muskies caught on trolling passes, roadbed. I could go on and on and on and on and tell you about stories about catching fish on roadbeds, walleyes, northern pike, stripers. I mean, name it, I'm catching them on roadbeds. And Buck loved roadbeds. So if Buck loved roadbeds, before I ever had that success on roadbeds, I loved it because Buck loved it. So I'm hoping you fall in love with any roadbeds you can find. You fishing reservoirs, located underwater roadbed. One that crosses the lake. Hopefully somewhere middle or upper two-thirds of the lake maybe. You don't want to get too far up the reservoir where a roadbed crosses over and you only have 12 feet of water in the channel and it's breaking off at 4 feet into 12 feet. Well, that roadbed we're not interested in. But where we still have good depth and that road crosses the lake and crosses that river channel at some place, you have a guaranteed productive structure. Not only does it lead all the way to the channel, it also is clean. These roadbeds and underwater railroad grades are clean. All of the timber and all of that stuff has been taken out of there. It doesn't exist. And in many cases, the guys in Texas complaining all the time about, they find this great bar and, there's stumps everywhere and there's still timber everywhere. It hasn't rotted it away yet. And they're losing one lure after the next, always hung up. Well, when you're always hung up, your lure isn't fishing. And if your lure isn't fishing, you're not catching. So one of the things that to me is critically important when fishing reservoirs, I need to find some clean areas. I need to find some clean structure. Well, underwater roadbeds are clean. Underwater railroad grades are clean. Dams are clean. Causeways are clean. These areas have been cleaned out before that reservoir was flooded. It's the reason I'm not spending a lot of time on detail mapping a dam, a causeway, underwater roadbed, underwater railroad grade. It's simple stuff. Most all of your answers are already built in. You don't have to create it. You don't have to locate it. You don't have to determine it. It's already been determined for you. They lead all the way, and they're breaking into the channel. The deepest water in the reservoir. The deepest water in the area of a reservoir would be the main river channel. So these structures lead all the way. In the case of the dams and the causeways, you can see them. You can get a road map out and know where you're going to go fish. I could spend 3 days on a reservoir off of a road map. I don't need nothing else. But if you have all of the other help, man, catching fish, pretty automatic. It really is. And we're going to talk and we're going to be showing more about fishing these structures, how I fish them, how I actually fish them. But these underwater roadbeds, man, I fell in love with them. Trust me. I was talking to an old friend, Danny Carpenter. I've mentioned him to you before on our vlogs. And he's the fellow who lived out there in Texas. He was out there at Sam Rayburn when we had that casting position I told you about that day where we got like 100 fish. And we located the next day, we went around, we're locating some other structures for them, and we found this underwater railroad grade, found it on the map. I said, we got to go there next. It's pretty close to that productive bar we were sitting on the day before. So we went out there and started catching fish right away. And I said, we can't spend the whole day here. We got too much work. We got to go out and look at a bunch of stuff. So at any rate, he marked that down in a hurry about that roadbed, the underwater railroad grade. And the other night on the phone when I was talking to him, I said, that roadbed that you found out there, I'm doing a vlog on it. I said, that roadbed you found out there, or we fished together. The day after we were on that bar, we hit that underwater railroad grade. And I said, I don't know why, we caught 25 or 30 fish right away, but then we left it and went and did other stuff. I said, I know you fished that. Subsequently, you went back and fished that. He said, man, I went back there all the time. He said, I took my wife back there. I took my friends over there. He said, I went there all the time. I said, well, if you could estimate how many fish you think you caught off of that underwater railroad grade over the years, how many do you think you caught? He said, well, did you want the truth? Like the real truth? I said, yeah, of course. He said, about a bazillion. And he yelled it into the phone. He said, man, every time we went there, he said, we catch 100, 150, 75, depending on how long we stayed. He said, they were always there. He said, it was like they'd move, and if the movement shut off, he said, you go back a half hour later, they'd back up on that thing. He said, it was unbelievable. He said, yeah, bazillion's about right. So it's another example of how great these structures are. I mean, if your main lake is a reservoir, find you some roadbeds. They probably exist. I guess I fished a few reservoirs where there wasn't a roadbed, but I can't remember too many. They all pretty much all have them. Locate them, and then go to fishing it. And again, one of the most important things I could say about fishing dams, causeways, underwater roadbeds, underwater railroad grades. These structures are best fished trolling. I know some of my viewers are casters, they're in big boats, they're used as steering wheels, they're kind of, you know, they're not convinced yet that they need to make a change about that. But if you have the ability and you have a tiller handle and you've got you a trolling rod and hopefully some spoon plugs, and if you don't have some, you should get some. But at any rate, these structures need to be trolled. That dam out of Grenada, it's like, I don't know, it's a couple of 3 miles long. I trolled that thing. I caught fish all along that dam. I'm telling you, I caught fish literally all along that dam. Now, if I started casting and tried to cover, you know, sitting out in the deeper water casting shallow like most bass fishermen do, and cast 3 miles, take me a couple of days. But a trolling pass I could make in 20 minutes. I think I told the story, and maybe it was in a vlog or maybe it was in a blog, but where Buck wanted to teach me how to be a better troller. He made me contour troll without a meter. Just contour troll the entire dam over there at Grenada one winter. Spent 2 days. In those 2 days, he said, you will be able to judge how well you do by how many fish we catch. Well, when we catch a fish, he wouldn't stop and go to the cast like normally we would do. He just keep on trolling, keep on trolling. At the end of the 2 days, I was pretty worn out, but I knew that we had a successful 2 days, and I asked him if he would consider it a successful 2 days, and I would assume I did a pretty fair job of trolling. And he said, well, I guess I have to give you a passing grade. He said, I didn't count, but I imagine we caught about 250 bass. I said, it seemed like 400 to me, but 250, I'll go with that. Catching fish all day long on that dam. Just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth at different depths. But if I didn't have a trolling rod, if I wasn't trolling, and if I didn't have spoon plugs, we maybe would have caught a dozen fish. But instead we caught 250. So these structures are long in area. Causeways, dams, roadbeds. I've been on roadbeds that go for 3-4 miles. You can find fish all along these structures. And the best way to do it is trolling. So, people, you know, we're not talking about presentation of lures. We're talking about detailed mapping and underwater roadbed or underwater railroad grade. You don't have to. All you have to do is start fishing. Locate it. You got to locate it. You can do that with the help of a contour map and your depth sounder. You go out there and you locate that rascal, and you locate where it's breaking into the channel. You throw a couple markers, you make a few pattern passes on it, and then you just start trolling up that road. You start following that road like you were following I-75, baby. And start catching fish, and that's what'll happen. Trust me, that's what'll happen. I love roadbeds. Buck love roadbeds. I love roadbeds. You need to fall in love with roadbeds. If you're fishing reservoirs, look for some roadbeds on your lake. And you'll be glad you did. But don't worry about any detail mapping. You don't have to do the same kind of stuff that we have to do when mapping natural structures. We have to do a little bit more work. But we know the contact point is where it comes out of the channel and you hit that road. There's a contact point. But many times the fish aren't just sitting at the contact point. They're all strewn along that whole road maybe for 100 yards. Big schools of big fish. It's terrific structure, and it's easy to fish. So with that being said, I think that's enough for today. We've covered natural stuff. We've covered the man-made stuff now. The key thing, my friends, and the reason for all of this discussion is for you to be able to put your lure in a place where you have the best chance of catching a fish. I want you to have your lure in the right place all the time. And even then, we don't always catch. Because the weather and water controls everything that goes on in that fish's life. We can't control that. But we can control our mapping and our interpretation, our detail mapping and interpretation, our presentation of lures. We can control all of that. And what we're trying to do is get our lure in the best place where we have the best chance to catch a fish. And we want to be doing that all day long. And general mapping and interpretation and detail mapping and interpretation will give you that edge that you need to keep your lure in the best place where you have the best chance. So with all that being said, thanks for being with me today. Appreciate you, each and every one of you. And I want you to be sure to follow us on Instagram. And before I leave that, I want you to check a day ago. My wife shot a quick picture with her phone, with her iPhone. When I had my boys out fishing for a day, it was my son's birthday, my youngest son's birthday. And Allie came with us. So there was my two sons and my wife in the boat. And we had a pretty tough day of fishing. The weather was not so good, and the wind was out of the northeast, and it came pretty choppy. It was about 1.5 2 foot waves out there. It wasn't a good fishing day, but we stayed with it. And we hadn't had much action until about 1 o'clock. All of a sudden, there was a little bit of a light change took place. And I joke about with my oldest son all the time about saying, I always notice when there's a little change in the weather, I can sense it, because Buck always could sense it. But when Buck would sense it, I couldn't see any kind of change at all, but he'd say, yeah, something's going to happen pretty soon. I've felt a change, and I never could feel it. I was always mesmerized by that. But after a lot of years on the water, there are times when I can feel a little something too. It's a little change. It's a little switch in the wind. Something changes. It's a little different than it's been all day. And that's when you expect something to happen. Because when fish become active and move, it's because there was a change took place in the upper atmosphere. We can't always see it, or don't always know it, but sometimes after a lot of experience you can feel it. So I said to my oldest son, I said, did you notice that I felt a little change take place? He said, yeah, I'm going to pull Buck Perry on you. He said, I definitely felt that change. There's been a change. Then we laughed a little bit about it, you know. And then it wasn't 10 minutes later, my youngest son hit a fish. And it was a good fish, and it was his birthday, right? So I was joking with him, we'd find him a big fish today for his birthday present, you know. And he reeled that rascal in. And as closer he got, the fish wasn't really active. And so he didn't really come up and jump. He sort of splashed the surface out when he was out a ways, but close up he hadn't jumped, so we hadn't seen the fish. And for some stroke of good luck, my wife put her iPhone on, since we didn't have a camera with it, and just hit the video and sort of shotgunned about where it looked like the fish was going to be. And she got this shot of this fish, this bass, that came up, and you could actually see his big mouth, and you could see part of his body, but his big mouth all of a sudden coming to the surface. You could see it before he broke the surface. And then all of a sudden he came out of the surface, and we saw he had a big one on, you know, it weighed 8 pounds. But then the fish jumped, and she got that whole jump, and my son was joking with me, my youngest son. He said, "Dad, I know you always just lip a bass, but I want you to get the net because I think this is a big fish." So I did. I shut the motor off, and I got the net. I said, "Okay, I'll net him for you, you know." And I didn't realize how big he was myself. So I got the net, and when that fish came out and he jumped right towards the boat, and I just lowered the net and reached maybe about 6 inches, and that fish jumped right into the net. And Allie got the whole thing on video of her cell phone. So she put it on Instagram yesterday. And so far, today, there's been 2,500 and some views. And it was almost like it was an accidental shot that turned out to be like something that looked like it had been done in Hollywood. You know, it was a perfect shot, done with her iPhone. So kudos to my wife for getting a great picture, and of course it was a great day, great birthday present for my youngest son. At any rate, follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe to our channel here on YouTube if you haven't already done it. We appreciate you, and we'll see you the next time.